Right, okay. Hello, thank you, Nigel. Get my clicker. Start. There we are. So thank you all for inviting me to speak today, and I'm glad you've all come. I'm a Londoner. I grew up in South London. My father was Norwegian and my mother was West Indian. They met when my father was in the Norwegian Navy, and they moved to Norway to be with his family. But it was just so cold for my poor mum that they decided to come to London, and that's where we stayed. So a little bit about me, just very quickly. I took a degree in fine art painting at Kingston Art College. We spent the first year doing a term in the printmaking studios, a term painting, a term sculpting. And in the printmaking term, we did screen printing, lithography, etching, everything. And it was an absolute whirlwind. And to be honest, I was quite glad to get back to the painting studio, the sort of relative calm. And that's where I stayed for the next 2 years, where I finished my degree. So I carried on painting until my children went to school, and then I signed on at a couple of classes, and that's where I started. Lino cuts appeal to me in particular because it's a simple process, and certainly to start with, you don't need much equipment. Your kitchen table, a few cutters, maybe a Baron or even an old tobacco tin, something like that to rub your prints. And also, I'm a terrible one for detail. You know, I'd put literally the last shoelace in if I could. And so with lino cuts, you have to edit right down to the bare essentials because, you know, essentially you're just cutting away at a piece of lino. So this is my studio. I share it with another printmaker, Louise Davis. She's an etcher and I'm a lino cutter, so we complement each other quite well. It's also nice to share your studio because you get a bit of company, a bit of support. It can be very intense if you're just literally working on your own all the time. And that's my Albion press. It's made in 1841 and it's where I print all my lino cuts. I bought it on eBay many years ago. He actually bought it to me on the back of his trailer all the way from Norfolk. You know, now, what I know now about cast iron presses, they're very fragile. They may look very sort of brutal and heavy, but they're actually quite fragile. Being cast iron, they can crack quite easily, and if that happens, well, it's very difficult to mend them. And that's the view from the other side. I work in a purpose-built studio in Woolwich. There's a lot of units there, 400 I think, all in Victorian warehouses. So it's freezing cold in the winter and boiling hot in the summer, but you know that's par for the course. It also has an big open access print studio with views over the Thames, which is a fantastic resource. So to do with urban scenes. And sorry, to me, you know, it's really, you want to look at the print, don't you? It's really hard with the microphone. I'm just wanting to talk like this and then you can't hear me, so I'll just have a... So the vast majority of people in the UK live in an urban environment, and that's what most people are familiar with. And what I find most interesting about cities is just sort of walking around and feeling all those layers of history still visible in what is a very modern city. And what I love about the built environment is how complicated it is and how much information there is just to interpret. Lino cuts have to be edited down to their absolute essentials, and a lot of details have to be removed. You have to consider lots of vanishing points, depths, and just the general composition. And the vast majority of people, oh no, sorry, excuse me. The mix of the old and the new. Oh, sorry, everybody. Right. The old and the new fascinate me. This is an image of what is Old Billingsgate. It's a very old building right on the side of the Thames, and it's slowly being surrounded. Yes, I do. Thank you. It's really hard to. Yeah, really hard. Well done, Gemma, for doing it like that. Right. Okay. I think I'll go back because now I can see what I'm looking at. Right, so the mix and the old fascinate me. This is an image of what has been variously called the GPO Tower, the Post Office Tower, and is now the BT Tower. It was built in the 60s, but there are all sorts of buildings still there. To the right is a Georgian building, and to the left is an Art Deco building, and all the way down this little mews, there are a mixture of Victorian warehouses and little modern blocks of flats. You know, and underneath that, of course, is who knows what. I mean, I think Roman pavements were 7 foot, or, I mean, huge distance down before you got to a Roman pavement. So very interesting. And this was old Billingsgate I was talking about. You have to remove a lot of the details when you're doing lino cuts. You just have to pare it down to the bare essentials, and I do quite like that, because I do actually end up finishing a print. So this is a lino cut of the Westway, which is sort of basically a great traffic jam in the sky, but I really love it. I mean, it cuts a great swathe through Hammersmith in West London. It chops straight across the Regent's Canal, but I think it's sort of rather magnificent. But I think when it was built, it was a great hoo-ha about it, as all these things are, because, of course, it disrupted people's lives terribly. And this is a print I did in lockdown. It is of a pub called the Old Cheshire Cheese, just off Fleet Street, one of the oldest pubs in London. Of course, at the time it was closed, and I had to sort of try and remember really what a pub looked like when it was all lit up and you were welcome inside. But I think I've known this pub a long time, and it's important to me to sort of know where I am and who I am in a place before I can sort of really talk about it. So London is a huge city, and it needs a very developed transport system to get everybody to be able to move around. The trains and roads are the sort of arteries of the city, and I've always been fascinated by them, how people coming and going in and out of the city all the time. And it used to be, you know, back in the day, certainly when I was a girl, you know, you could basically go up to the centre of town, or you could come back again, and things have developed really very well lately. You can scoot right round, you can go sort of diagonally across, so it's a much better way of getting across London than jumping in your car. And this is the M25. I'm sure some of you here will know and love that London orbital. It extends right, it basically goes right round the outskirts of London, and the green belt is there too, thank goodness. Otherwise we would have no end to the urban sprawl. I think London would have just carried on going to Brighton probably. And this is called The Road to Nowhere, after the Talking Heads song. And actually the London orbital, I mean, despite having up to 5 lanes, it's still not enough. It's still, you know, just blocked most of the time. So the transport links, well, they do include canals as well. And obviously we're a very important part of getting goods around urban centres for a long time. And then, of course, with cars and lorries, they fell into disuse. You know, I remember canal towpaths being really quite dangerous places to be. The canals were full of, well, dead animals and trolley carts and all sorts of unsavoury things, and you really didn't want to be there at night. But now, you know, there's food trucks, there's people roller skating and skateboarding. It's just a changed world along there. They've become amenities instead of, you know, urban helpers, if you like. So that's gentrification, which of course is another subject entirely, I guess. So yeah, so this is I think cities are just restless places. They're constantly changing. I sometimes feel like I'm creating a historical document as I'm working, because it's just 1 minute. I mean, this is Waterloo East Station, and what I quite liked about it is it's quite flat just there, and you had this huge sky. So you had the station, but you could see this beautiful sky. And then they've now built what is the largest, tallest building in the UK, the Shard. So everywhere you look, in that sky, this enormous pointy building is there. It just dominates the station. It dominates the whole area. Creates wind tunnels. So, you know, it just changes so quickly. And I don't think this print it's the same view. You know, nothing's changed, but except for the Shard there. And this is another view, which has changed a lot. I think London is really, you could just call it a huge building site. Nothing stays the same. This print is called Factory Junction. And it's a view from the passenger footbridge at Wandsworth Road Station, looking straight across, north towards the river. And between one sketching trip and another, they took the gasometer down. That huge, and it was beautiful. It was pale blue. It was a lovely, lovely thing. They just took it down. And I went sketching the next time. It wasn't there. And of course, we all know about Battersea Power Station. Soon that view is, I imagine you can't see it anymore. I haven't been for a while, but I don't suppose you can see the station, the Battersea Power Station anymore, because they built a whole load of luxury flats all around the back of it. And the only way you can see the power station now is actually from the river or from the other side, which is a shame. And of course, but you know, on the plus side, we've got a lot more luxury flats. So this is a very old print. This is of London Bridge Station. And I made this print, and then really very shortly after, they started deciding they were going to demolish the Victorian roof structure, which sadly wasn't listed, in order to modernise the whole station. And the way you could see this view was you had to go up and down the stairs over passenger footbridges to change platforms. And so while you were there, you know, it was dirty old grimy bits of windows, and you couldn't, but normally you'd have a cracked window or two. You could sort of peer through and see this fantastic panorama of South London spread before you. So that all went, and now they've got a new modern canopy, which is, it's a bit ugly, really, to be honest. But you have to go down under the station, under the platforms to change, down escalators. And it is much easier to use. It's much cleaner. It's much safer. But it does, you know, something gets lost in the name of progress, I think, quite often. So this is just a couple of my sketchbooks. Still about changing London, really, changing cities. 10 years ago, I did a quick sketch from the train, the top one. It's the view of the skyline across the river, you know, as you're going from Waterloo East to Charing Cross. And it's that the gherkin had just been built, and I remember thinking, oh, that's a nice shape. It would do for a print, maybe. And so by the time I came to make a start on the print, which was, well, it was 10 years later, to be honest, so I know I'm a slow worker, but the skyline had changed completely. And, you know, there must be another 6 skyscrapers have been sprouted up, dwarfing all those original ones, the NatWest Tower. We thought these were tall enough, quite honestly. And 2 of these skyscrapers were still being constructed when I was making the print. So in the end, I got the artist's impressions from the internet, and I put them in as if they were already there, because otherwise, by the time I'd finished the print, it would have been out of date. So that's what I did. And this here is the finished print with some of the new huge tower blocks. But what really spurred me on to make this print at that point is that just to the right, just to the left, there was for years and years and years a derelict pub. All that was left was a few brick walls and some iron girders. And obviously it was a nice old Victorian pub that had been burnt out, and it just sat there for ages. And then suddenly I saw it had all been demolished, and there was a building site there, and I thought, if I don't do this print now, there's going to be another skyscraper of some sort, and I won't see that view. It'll just be blotted out yet again. So that's why I did it. So I got in there quick, and a fine selection of, well, what I think of as, well, you know, they are mostly blots on the landscape, especially the walkie-talkie on the right. I had to work extremely hard to get that to look in any way elegant, because it is so fat and dwarfish, and it just dominates all the other buildings, which look, you know, sylph-like in comparison. So I'll just go through my process quite quickly. It starts with quick sketches and photos, and then I'll go back to the studio and draw a very detailed study that then I will trace onto the blocks. This is the drawing of the Regent's Canal print that I showed you earlier, with Bethnal Green gasometer in the background. And these are the 4 blocks that I eventually cut. I don't cut all the blocks all at once. I'll use 4 blocks. I'll transfer the drawing onto each, and then I will probably cut a little bit on the first block and print it, then cut a little bit on the second block and print that, and go right through to see, just to sort of inch through and see, you know, where I'm going with it. And then I'll go back to the beginning and I'll cut a little more on the first block, and so on until I've finished it, which can be, you know, quite a long, drawn-out process. So I often make a lot of notes as I go along as well, because, well, I've got a terrible memory and it's a complicated process, and it's so easy to forget something crucial. You might have a thought late at night, or, you know, while you're cooking breakfast or something, about what you could do, almost like a breakthrough, and you think, whoa. And if I don't, you know, write it down, I'll forget about it, and then the print is finished, and then I've not done it. And I've done that before, where I thought, oh no, I was going to put the cranes in. It would have made such a difference, and I haven't. So that's why I make a lot of notes, you know, and tick them off as I go along. And then I start proofing, which is, so this is the same, happens to be the same canal print. I'll try various colour combinations. I mean, they're very roughly printed because I'm just trying to work it out. So the second colour I had, I tried as a pink over the dark brown, and then as a pale yellow over the dark brown, and then I carried on. I used the same colours going forward to see what difference it would make, but in the end I went for the pale yellow on the finished print, as you can see here. I then used a bright yellow and a blue on the top to get the depth of colour, although, I mean, you know, I do love a bit of pink, I have to say. So I thought it might be interesting to just very quickly run through the layering of. So this is another print of Borough Market. I love wandering around the city just looking, and I often walk through Borough Market, which is right by London Bridge, on my way to various places. And this was done again during lockdown, when nobody was there really, except, you know, people like myself walking through. All the stalls, which were, you know, normally full of bustling people, all shuttered up. It was really quite odd, actually, really quite odd. But the process is dark brown. I used a dark brown. I will use a dark brown, or I might use a turquoise or a mid-blue. So I used something fairly dark to start with. And then I used a pale, very, very pale yellow, cream, really. And then a very bright yellow to you know, to get the idea of the sun streaming through the market. And then a sort of viridian for the very last colour. That's me printing printing the final one, I used the last colour was the Viridian, which I wouldn't normally use, but because I don't know if anybody knows Borough Market, but it's painted in this really quite unusual green, and I don't, you know, I quite like to have fun with colour, but in this case I felt I really needed to stick with the colour, otherwise it would have been any old market, not Borough Market. So yes, a ghostly sort of print really, with just a couple of people walking through, and it's called A Time of Quiet. So colours, they're very bright, but they are rooted in reality. What I love about printmaking is that you take your chances, basically, with you don't know what you're going to get, and the end result is always surprising. In some ways, the prints have a mind of their own. I'm sure you all know that. A bit like childbirth, you know, you get the child you're given, and you get the print you're given. Really, for me, anyway. Unusually, this is a view of London that hasn't changed for hundreds of years. It's the view from St James's Park across to Whitehall. And I guess being the very heart of government, it's not subject to planning freefall that the rest of London has to put up with. It's called Storm Clouds over Whitehall, which I think is probably quite appropriate for just now. So this is some of the proofs that I do. I proof a lot sometimes. Sometimes it goes quite well and I'll only proof a few, but mostly it goes like this. I like to get the right colour, the right depth, you know, the right combination of neutrals. And to be honest, this is just 4 blocks, and the combinations you can get with just those 4 blocks and a bit of ink is astonishing to me after all these years. And, you know, choosing can be a bit of a nightmare, really. You know, you can quite often lose sight of what it was you were trying. When you're standing there with the hustle and bustle of the city around you, you know, you do get something in your head, and sometimes it's really easy to be seduced by all this and end up thinking, oh, no, I'll do that one with the cherry red branches. It's gorgeous, but it's not what you had in your head. So, but I think perhaps that's the training as a painter probably has something to do with that. So this is, you know, this is. Sometimes things don't go right in printmaking. I'm sure you all know that. And this is a print. The lino cut at this stage was half finished, and I realised on the top print that absolutely nothing was happening in the bottom left-hand corner. You don't know till you start printing. You know, it can be quite a surprise. The drawing, it looks fine, and then when you come to actually make a print, you realise that something's lacking. And for me, something was lacking in that bottom left-hand corner. So I decided I needed to put another train in to add a bit of interest there. So I cut a big hole in the 4 blocks, and I inserted a new train just in there. I mean, to be honest, it's the view of Farringdon, and the trains. It shares its tracks with tubes and trains, so there are trains coming in and out the whole time. So it probably did need another train. And that's the finished print. It's called Red Moon Rising. You can see St Paul's and the Shard in the distance, and another building I can't quite remember, and a few spindly London trees. I got this view by standing on tiptoe over a bridge, really, and there was, you know, buses and cars and taxis roaring past, and I was teetering on my, you know, trying to just have a look. You know, it's not. I don't think you could see it unless you jumped up and down, actually. So, having talked about colour in the city, I've now recently become interested in the graphic qualities of black and white, which I think sort of capture a different dimension to the urban scene, really. You just use structure alone for these. And, you know, I do find with black and white that, you know, because it's just black, it's easier to spot any little problems, you can't smudge a bit of colour over the top of a problem area. It's just what it is. Sometimes you can see a bit of perspective that's not working or a weakness that you weren't aware of. So, it's just a different aspect, really. And this print is of Victoria Station, from the poem by Philip Larkin. It's called Poetry of Departures. It's actually a poem about somebody standing there waiting for their train home, and he's thinking, should I just chuck it all in and just go somewhere else? And it's quite a long monologue about whether to do it and what would people say. And then in the end, he doesn't do it. He just sort of goes home, which is, obviously most people's experience. And it was part of an exhibition I had at Eames Fine Art a few months ago called Back to Black. And this is a print of Balham Tube Station. We see the world in colour, obviously, and sometimes, when you see an image in black and white, it makes you stop and makes you pause and look again, I think. Black and white reduces, a very intricate and complicated scene into I don't know, just form and contrast, but in a timeless way. It's just shape and pattern, really. And the figures, they become less human in a way and more sort of ciphers. So it's a very interesting thing so I quite often will do a couple of colour ones and then I'll stop and do a black and white one, and it just makes you see things differently, really. It's called Gateway to the South, Balham Tube Station. I don't know if anybody knows the Peter Sellers sketch. One of my favourites, very funny. It's on YouTube if anybody ever wants to tune into it. He did it on the radio. So this is another one which is sort of black and white. Check my timings. That's not too bad. So sometimes I add a small amount of colour to a black and white print. I used a separate colour block behind. So this is like a black key block, which I don't normally never use a black key block, which is quite a traditional way of doing lino cuts. You put all the colour on and you pull it all together by having a line drawing cut as lino. And I don't tend to do that, really. I think probably because I don't really like cutting so intricately, really. But in this case, I had a very simple plain block with a bit of blue, a bit of bright yellow and a bit of olive green on the bottom, and then I put the key block on the top. And this print is called Faraway Suburbs, and it's the view from the end of the platforms at London Bridge. And this is called Snow in the Suburbs. This is an old print, but I particularly like it because it's that feeling you get of travelling around a big city and getting glimpses of people's lives as you pass through. You get people on the platforms, people reading, people getting on and off the train. And when you're actually on the train, of course, everybody sits there and you can see into people's gardens and you can see into their kitchens. And you don't see any more than a little tableau as you're passing by. They're just brief glimpses. And it's, well, I'm sure, we all find that actually quite fascinating. You sometimes see quite odd things and you think, hang on, what happened there? But, you're gone. So that's that. This is the view from Lewisham through to New Cross. It's any suburban line, really, to be honest. So a lot of my inspiration comes from travelling around, obviously, as I've said. Looking out of train windows, the glimpses you get of the city are not the views you would get in any other way. You really don't. This print is called Some High Lonely Tower. And, of course, you can see the dreaded Shard there. It's the view out of the window of the train, looking down on South Great Suffolk Street, which you can just see. And you just wouldn't ever see this view except if you happen to be looking down as you go by in that sort of second or two. And I love all that. I love travelling around the city in that way. It's like a little guide rope that I use to explore the city, really. So yeah, that print is a very big print. It's I think it's 95 by 55, something like that. It's the biggest print that I can do on my Albion. And I can only do that by printing it one way, turning the whole registration block round and pushing it through and doing the other end. But, you know, it's fine because, you know, being a multi... I mean, if you did it black and white, you couldn't do that. You'd probably get the join. You know, you'd sort of see a bit of a, you know, build-up of ink or something. But because you've got 4 layers of ink, it's perfectly OK. So that's the print I just showed you, just an earlier stage. So this is another view from the train, and this is the views if you were going north, straight north up to Blackfriars Station, and you just glance, and there's tower blocks all the way along that stretch, but there's a little gap where the tracks come under you. Excuse me, the trains come under the tracks that you're on and go on to Liverpool Street to Waterloo East Station. You can see the London Eye beyond, but again, it's you know, a matter of a second or two. It's only there literally for seconds, but it's just a little perfect little vignette, I think. And also in London, you don't see views like that very often. You know, you've got trees in the way. You know, you might see something down a side street, but seeing these sort of wide open spaces without another building in the front this is probably one of the only ways that you can do it. Yeah, so people. I do like to put people into my scenes. I think, you know, London, any big city, is inhabited by people. I like to use them to provide some narrative, I think, a human counterpoint, because a lot of these places that I'm drawn to are very hard-edged, quite alien. And I also like the fact that people are not there for very long. They're coming and they're going. They add a bit of atmosphere, but if you could imagine that train station with absolutely nobody there, no trains, well, it gives you a completely different view. It's a different thing entirely. I think there's always a narrative when you put people in, because the viewer will always put their own interpretation on each of these little figures, which is quite nice, really. You know, you can just sort of imagine what each of them are doing, and quite like it, really. I quite like to, not sometimes, just depends. And of course, urban spaces, you know, they're there for people. They're built for people. They're there for people to move about in. And in many ways, what you see is like the theatre, in a way. You know, it's the backdrop to their lives. They're passing through, and I love the way different people are doing different things, you know, pulling the suitcase up. You know, it's obviously a heavy suitcase, and he's trudging up there with, maybe he's come from the airport. And on the left, you've got some mum. I imagine she's dragging her kid off to preschool because she's got to get to work. You know, it's nice to see these little bits, these little snaps of daily dramas. And escalators, you know, they're really good for just sort of looking at people going up and down. I mean, you see some really weird things, I have to say. And the thing is that you think you're looking and you're not really there, so you're sort of looking, you see something, you think, hang on a minute, and by the time you've turned around, they've gone. But it's fun, you know. It's fun to sort of watch people in that way, because they're not really looking back at you. They're busy doing whatever they're doing. So yeah, petrol stations. I don't know. It's just another one of those unconsidered places that you know, which are overlooked. Everybody knows a petrol station, but nobody ever really sort of thinks about it, because you're not, you know, you're just getting your petrol, aren't you? So, you know, I drive to the studio in Woolwich, and I've sat at these traffic lights many, many times. And, you know, there I was with the fried chicken shop on the right and, you know, the cemetery on the left. I could tell you where it was. But in the distance, and it was raining, it was cold, it was getting quite dark, I could see in the distance this beacon, and it was the petrol station. And I'd never really seen it like that. And I just thought, I don't know, you know, these places that we all know, and you can always find something, I think, something beautiful anyway. This is called What Is This Life? this print, and it's from the poem by W.H. Davis, you know, what is this life if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare. He does go on to talk about, you know, cows and fields and things, but you get the gist. It's the same thing, you know, just stopping for a moment and just looking at the moon. I mean, you know, why not? And this is this is a print of Soho. Soho, at the time I did this print, was pretty grubby and sleazy, but it was also really quite exciting and vibrant. Everybody who lives in the city, we all share each other's lives to a certain extent, and you only ever catch a partial glimpse of them as they go by. We never see what happens next. And this was a man walking down Walker's Court, normally very busy, but early morning, you know, and you do wonder what he was up to, but I guess, well, being Soho, you don't want to know. And this is, again, this idea of travel and people not being aware of themselves. And so they're quite unguarded. They're on their iPhones, iPads. They're just not concentrating, really. And, you know, they sort of reveal more of themselves as they're just sort of standing there. You can watch them without people thinking you're weird. And they're not aware of themselves in relation to other people, you know that idea of people starring in the movie of their own lives inside. And when they're not concentrating, it just feels more, they seem more true, really. The top one is called Against the Tide, and the bottom one is All the World's a Stage, which has 27 little umbrellas, in case anybody wants to know. Quite enjoyed that one. So there's nothing, you know, I mean, a train station, there's nothing really inherently glamorous or attractive about a train station. This is Liverpool Street Station, and it's a particularly mucked up station. It's got shops everywhere. You can't, I mean, it took me a long time to find a view that I could do. You couldn't, you know, it's got a fantastic structure, but you can't see it. It's so cluttered with a whole load of rubbish, really. So I did find this little view of people waiting to go home. It's called Home Before Dark. And again, you know, they're cold, they're tired, they just want to go home. They're not sort of, you know, looking around the station thinking, oh, what a marvellous structure this is. They just, you know, it's just, oh, I think that might be my timer to stop. So I'm nearly there. So I sometimes get commissions, and did one recently for London Transport. They do a scheme called Hidden London, where they try and get people to buy tickets to go and see their disused stations and deserted stations. Gemma might be interested in that. And they wanted to do a marketing campaign for this particular thing, this particular campaign. So I did 2 posters for them. One of the Strand station in the Strand, the other one Highgate High Level, which is on top of Highgate Station itself, and was only in use for about 5 years before they closed it. And as you can see, nature is really reclaiming it, and it's actually a bit of a sanctuary. They've even got bats there now. So just to say very quickly that I'm now working on The Great Trees of London. I don't know if anybody knows that book, where there's, 60 trees chosen by the public, really old trees that people really love. And they had a book and a TV series a long time ago. But I've always been really interested in nature in London, clinging on despite the pollution, the traffic, you know, and they seem to thrive. And at the moment I'm working on this is just sketchbook prints, drawings of various big trees that I know about. I'm doing one of the Dorchester Hotel, which has the most enormous plane tree right in front of it on a tiny little circle of green. But there it is, with Hyde Park Corner right there. It looks lovely. So just really to sort of finish, I feel that I get to know the station, London, any city. You get to know it by walking around, by travelling around. It's an ongoing process of discovery. I'm always following the same threads, whether I know it or not. And living in an urban sort of environment has its drawbacks. It's dirty. It can be quite aggressive, crowded. But it has this great privilege of being able to walk around and see new things all the time that you hadn't seen. And, you know, and it's the perfect excuse to just wander around on your own, having a nice time. So I'm going to end my talk. I do like to quote this one, so if you've heard it before, apologies. It's my favourite quote about printmaking. It's by George Bodmer, who's an American academic and printmaker. And he says, "Printmaking is fun because it takes a perfectly simple process like drawing and makes it as complicated and error-prone as possible." So, thank you very much for listening.
Just asking if there's any questions.
You do that.
Okay. So, is there any questions? I'm sure there's
As I've got the mic, can I ask the first question? When you were showing Liverpool Street Station, I counted 22 people. In that patinque. It might be wrong. There might be more behind pillars. But my question was about time. These are big prints and multicoloured. From inception to a completion of an edition, how long would that take?
Well, this size, this big size would...
Yes.
Yeah, say this size, for example, because it's 4 blocks. I reckon it would probably take 4 or 5 months. So then I would do one of those maybe every couple of years. I mean, it's a slow process, isn't it, printmaking? So I do maybe one of those every couple of years, and then the rest of the time I do quicker ones. I mean, I can do a smaller one with 4 blocks in a couple of weeks if I put my mind to it, but I am a slow worker, you know, yeah.
Do you ever do reduction? Oh, sorry. Do you ever do reduction lino cuts?
Well, no, I started doing I did one reduction lino cut, but I I changed my mind such a lot. I think I'm a control freak, really. I'm not a spontaneous, intuitive sort of printmaker at all. I'm a planner by nature, which is, I mean, it's a shame. I'd rather be that free spirit, but I'm not. So it suits me better to do multi-blocks because, as you saw, I can just go back and fill in a bit if I really don't like it. Whereas with reduction, of course, kamikaze thing, you just cut away. And then, the good thing about it is that you have a small edition, and then it's done. And you can go on to the next one completely fresh, whereas I spend quite a lot of my working life editioning prints that are really quite old now, and I don't really want to do that anymore. But I suppose I could do smaller editions, but, bills to pay, so, yeah.
This is just an observation, really.
Yeah.
I love how your London Bridge section coming into Waterloo has the yellow, because it reminds me of the Peakfreen custard cream factory.
Oh, yes.
Which I don't know whether it still exists, but it was part of my childhood. Is that coming into London Bridge, there would be this sickly smell of custard creams on the journey, which was noticeable, and I just engaged with the yellow.
Oh, yes, probably long gone now.
Probably.
Yeah.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Have you ever come across anything to do with copyright for buildings, architecture-wise? And I noticed with the train, you got the Costa coffee cups. Have you ever somebody said something to me about that?
I don't know. I think it's free usage. I mean, Costa coffee cups are everywhere. You can't. Costa would have to say to people, "You've taken a photo, and you can't use that because it's got our coffee cup." It's free usage. It's part of.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you for a second? It's going to be
No. Do you want to?
just say this. I'm sorry to bother you. There's just going to be a fire alarm going off, testing, in a minute or so. So just be prepared for it.
All right. Okay. Right, yes, but in terms of like buildings, I think that if you can see it, it's like when you photograph people on the street, you're allowed to use those because if you want to be private, you shouldn't be, you know, being in public. So I assume I'm all right with that one. I've no idea, really, Jackie. Thank you for worrying me, though.
No, it's just something. It's just something somebody mentioned to me because I do buildings, and they did say that probably in the USA, it's more problematic.
Dodgy. Actually, I have to say, with the Costa Coffee Cup, I have a lovely gallery, a London gallery, and they sometimes deal with art in hospitals. And art in hospitals wanted one of those prints with the Costa Coffee Cup and didn't buy it in the end because they felt it might be seen as advertising. So, yeah, so there is that side of things, isn't there? Interesting.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, the colours you use are beautiful. What inks do you use?
I use oil-based relief inks, which are probably quite toxic, actually. But and you can get water-based ones, which you can wash, you know, underwater, which would be much better for the environment. Excuse me, but I like it's the colour. It's like using oil paints versus acrylic. It depends on what you want. But with the oil-based, you get a real richness of colour. Although they do take a long time to dry, sometimes days between layers. You put the first layer on, that dries quite quickly because a lot of the oil will sink into the paper, and then each subsequent layer of ink that you put on takes longer to dry because it's not so absorbent. So it's it's a slow process.
Hi, Gail. I just wanted to ask. I noticed the umbrellas are kind of a recurring theme in your prints, and a lot of the other prints that don't feature umbrellas show people kind of facing away or their faces distorted. And I was wondering if that was a kind of a deliberate choice to kind of show the fleeting nature of seeing strangers in that setting.
Well, I don't want people. I mean, I like them to be slightly anonymous. I don't want them to be real people. I don't want them to be portraits. So I don't want them to be recognisably, a one person. I'd rather they were just a symbol of a certain sort of person, if you like, a tall man and a mother and that sort of thing. But also, of course, if you're facing and you've got, these prints, some of these prints are, you've got these faces are like that, tiny little faces, and to try and cut an eyes and a nose and a mouth, well, so no, I don't tend to put faces in, but that's a very good question. Thank you. Interesting.
Hi. When you do an edition, do you print them all in one go, or do you know how many you're going to do and sort of catch up later on?
No, I don't. I couldn't possibly do all of them. I mean, it's quite laborious and boring, actually. So no, I will print maybe, depending on the size, sometimes as many as 10 in a go, sometimes 6. Those big ones, I'll print 6 up at a time. And also, best will in the world, some prints sell really, really well, and that's brilliant. Some just nobody likes except me. So you don't want to have a whole edition of prints in your drawer for, and what do you do with them? So it's sort of practical, really, to just do a few at a time for storage, really.